we're with Barbara L'Italian. She's a state rep, and she's going to be running for state senate this race against the Republican challenger Alex Vespoli. We want to welcome you to the Sun today.
Thank you.
Barbara, just tell us a little about your background, your experience in the legislature, and then we'll get into some general campaign questions.
Sure. So my background is that I worked prior to the legislature in the field of gerontology. I worked at Elder Services Merrimack Valley. I actually was a Lowell area case manager, and then moved on to working the adult family care program, which is essentially foster care placement of seniors and people with disabilities into someone else's home. Then moved on to do protective services work, and did some work for a time in Philadelphia for a year when I got married, and then came back and worked in Watertown, still in the field of gerontology. So that was my background, and then left to have the first of my 4 children back in 1990, and so was primarily a stay-at-home mom for 13 years. I did help my husband run his benefits and the books on a small business that he ran out of North Andover in the mid-90s. And that was he was a software engineer, headhunter essentially. So I did some of that work for him. I would say that the vast majority of the time that I spent at home, I was really attending to the needs of my oldest child, Rudy, who has autism. That was really a full-time endeavor, trying to help him become on a good path. During that time, he was placed out of the school district in Andover, and there really was no school to place him in, and so I ended up helping create the first school of its kind for kids like him in the country, and it was at the McLean Hospital outpatient. It was there. We literally lent our desks, our wall dividers, helped pick curriculum to get that program up and running. At the same time, I was very active with my younger kids in our school PTO, helped raise money to refurbish our library at Bancroft and to build a brand new playground. I also was involved in the Andona Society, which is a women's group that raises funds to fund anything that sort of the school system needs that they can't provide. Ran for office back in 2002. It was a newly constructed seat as a result of post-census redistricting. Won that seat,
That was the state rep seat.
State rep seat, represented 6 communities: Andover, North Andover, Boxford, Georgetown, Haverhill, and Methuen. It was the epitome of gerrymandering. It was shaped like a 2-headed snake. It wrapped around Lawrence, so it never included Lawrence. And because I had 2 cities and 4 towns, Boxford and Andover being quite wealthy, North Andover the same, and then Georgetown, it really forced me to be very fair about my approach to legislating. You know, I think the easiest thing in the world is to represent a homogeneous district. It gets a lot more complicated when you have to think of impacts on many different levels of economic strata, education, etc. My first vote was to vote not to vote for Tom Finneran as Speaker. I therefore earned a lovely basement office in the State House for 6 years. And I was placed next to one of Tom Finneran's lieutenants. And I think the object was to keep me in line. And in fact, instead what happened was I became very good friends with this gentleman. He's now the dean of the delegation, Angelo Scotia. And I learned to understand the history of the building, the history of what had taken place prior to my getting there. So I really used it to my advantage. Despite being in the basement, I was able to pass a number of pieces of legislation. I worked in concert with Sue Tucker on the Senate side. We were able to pass elder legislation that tried to put more of a focus on funding for community-based care for seniors as opposed to nursing homes. Nursing homes are a virtual entitlement in this state at a cost that is 4 times the cost of helping to maintain someone in their home. And I just think that we need to be about a better way of managing our Medicaid dollars. It's one of the largest parts of our budget. And so I did a lot of work on that, chaired the Elder Caucus, made sure it was a bipartisan membership, chose Richard Ross, who replaced Scott Brown in the Senate, as my compadre in the House. and really worked with everybody. Because I had Boxford and two Republicans that I shared my district with there, Bruce Tarr and Brad Hill, I really needed to work with everyone and just cross party lines and be about, good decisions, smart government. Another big piece of work that I did when I was in the legislature by virtue of my family experience was I began to look at this issue of autism, the growing public health crisis of autism, and what could we do to make that better. And when I first got in the door, I hosted all of the commissioners that I thought were of relevant state agencies and just told them of my own story, but of many other people's stories of just having no safety net, for their child on the autism spectrum. As a result, over the 8 years I was there, I was able to get a division on autism started. I was able to get federal Medicaid waiver money to leverage the state funds that were going in to help low-income children, 0 to age 8, for a period of 3 years to try to get them on the best possible path to become the best possible person that they could. All the research suggests that if we can get to these kids early, they have the possibility of a productive life as opposed to a life of being an SSI disability consumer. Was also able to provide protection from bullying for folks with autism, protections within the IEP process, able to get autism as a private insurance coverage, which I thought was an issue of fairness because families were paying their premiums and they could get coverage for their kids with asthma, but not for their child with autism. And so that was passed in 2010, as was an autism commission, which I chaired for the past, since 2010. We wrote a 10-year plan on how to better manage autism, put out 13 recommendations 2 years ago, and 8 of those were passed into law into an omnibus autism bill that was signed on August 7th. Some of that includes having low-income folks now be able to have behavior and communication therapy covered under Mass Health. Why is that important? Because the failure to do that means, again, that those kids won't have the best possible outcome. Many of them end up hospitalized. Many of them end up hospitalized out of state at Hampstead Hospital. And so, again, this issue of using Medicaid dollars in a targeted, smart way at the earliest possible onset for the best possible outcome. So that will be part of this bill that will take effect on November 7th. Another piece will be teacher training, so raising the floor of knowledge statewide for teachers. Many teachers have a growing number of kids with autism in their classrooms, and they want to do the right thing but desperately need training. And failure to do that ends up in out-of-district placements, which are more costly, very isolating, and I would argue oftentimes not appropriate. Another component of the autism bill will be a tax advantage savings account for families of any child with a disability. It just seems strange that I can save on a pre-tax account for my kids for college, but I can't for my child who's going to need a lifetime of assistance. And so it really will now allow families to be able to save for the gap between what government is able to do for them and what needs to be done. And lastly, there's an issue, a big issue statewide that we found during the course of the commission, that there are folks with autism that our state is the only one in the nation that goes by IQ to determine whether or not you receive adult services. So you could test and be a 70 IQ or higher and yet need tremendous assistance to get through the day. It just seemed like a very short-sighted way of looking at this rather than gearing it to what people need, what their functional impairment status is. So that is going to change now as of November 7th. Developmental services will not automatically preclude people from being considered for service. It doesn't mean they're going to get service. It means they have an opportunity to get through the front door and make their case. So the work that I've done on autism, really, we lead the nation, and I've had a direct hand in every piece of that. And that's just an example of just the determination that I bring to the job and to wanting to tackle issues. I worked also on economic development in my district. There were really two major hubs of employment that we were focusing on. One was the Lucent Center, the former Lucent Technologies plant, and trying to assist with bringing small to medium-sized companies in to populate that building. The days of having a large employer, unfortunately, are gone, and it's, you know, we really can't put all our eggs in one basket. And so working to help bring, you know, small to mid-sized businesses in there. The same for the I-93 corridor between Dascom Road and 125. Was able to get infrastructure money in as the first step towards opening up that landlocked area where Pfizer and the Procter & Gamble site, the Gillette site, are located. And then, you know, did a lot of work with small business banking when I entered the work for the state treasurer.
So you left for the state treasurer, what, in 2008?
No. I was voted out of office in 2010. So I left in January of 2011, and Treasurer Grossman wanted me to be his Director of Government Affairs because he and all of his staff had never worked in the State House. So they didn't know how the budget cycle went, how the legislative cycle went. It was really a process of teaching and training his staff and doing the overtures to all of the members in the legislature.
Who did you lose to in 2010?
Jim Lyons.
Lyons, okay. So when you looked, what do you think you did there?
I think it was directly attributable to my vote to raise the sales tax. And at the time, in fact, I literally have my back of the envelope from back then. I've saved it. We had a $5.2 billion deficit. And I thought we took a balanced approach. We leveraged $1.2 billion in federal stimulus money. We raised $1.3 billion in revenues, and we did $2.4 billion in program savings and cuts. I was the vice chair of Ways and Means. I had many sleepless nights because I knew there were so many things that were going to be cut or eliminated in those years. All earmarks were taken out in the 2 years that I was in Ways and Means. There were city legislators that were shocked and in disbelief right up until the day they saw the budget come out when we said there'll be no earmarks. We need to, you know, we need to reduce this budget. We need to be smart about this. And so, I mean, that's what I attribute it to.
You seem to have a fairly productive term as a rep.
Yes, yes.
You know, you just highlighted a whole bunch of achievements.
Right.
I find it's hard to believe that you could pin it down to just one issue. Think of really what's just that one
I do
vote?
think it was that issue. I do think it was. I think that people were feeling, you know, concerned, and not unlike when someone has an opportunity to vote on an override, right? So they may be feeling that they have a lot of costs that are spiraling for them, and this is something where they have control over making a decision. So I do believe that that was the case. I will tell you that I felt as though that vote was one that was an agonizing exercise. At that point, we felt, because of the fact that you know, food and clothing up to $150 was exempt, that was the lesser of many evils. And there was a specific avoidance of looking at the gas tax and doing that. The alcohol tax was added on the Senate side in the Senate budget process. Although I was deeply concerned about that impact on our border communities, you know, not voting for the budget meant not voting for everything, the whole package. You know, local aid and everything else that was in there.
So Lyons' 2 terms as a rep, particularly the last 2 years, he's generated a lot of publicity. Particularly with Mark Lombardo from Billerica.
Right.
So I'm curious why you might not be running to get your old rep seat back, and why are you running for state senate instead?
Right.
Is it the open seat that attracted you?
Well, I mean, I see it as a progression for me. I had 8 years as a state representative. I had always been interested in the Senate seat. When Sue Tucker decided to step aside, Barry Feingold jumped into the race. Barry had already shown his ability to raise $1 million in that congressional race in 2007. A very fine woman on the school committee at the time by the name of Deb Silberstein also jumped into the race, and then there was Jack Wilson. And quite frankly, I felt as though Deb and I would have drawn from the same pool of voters, so I just don't think that it made sense to jump into that race at that time. But I see it as a progression. I mean, I was one of 160, and I really established myself as a leader on a number of issues, and had a lot of legislators that were in there that were willing to follow me, to trust that I was giving them good information, and to get a lot of work done. And that can be done without having to be a member of leadership. You know, you just have to be willing to put yourself out there, work with everyone, inform them, build coalitions. You know, the pieces of legislation that I passed, the Autism Commission, the Autism Medical Insurance, I passed 4 pieces of legislation as an outside person this year, and all of those were bipartisan and they were unanimous. And I think it's because people really do want to do the right thing. Many people need to be led. I'm a leader, and so you know, I was able to get a tremendous amount accomplished in the legislature, you know, during my time as the Autism Commission Chair and working for the ARC of Massachusetts. But I think that I'd like to take it to the next level and go to the Senate and see what I could do there.
You talked about that district being gerrymandered. You know, the district that you want to represent now is one of the strangest districts I've ever seen.
I agree.
So talk a little bit about that in terms of balancing the needs of an Andover against a Lawrence or Tewksbury against a Drake.
Right.
You must view this district in a very similar fashion as you viewed your own rep district.
Absolutely. But I think it's a strength that I've already dealt with a similar district that has such disparity. I mean, the general feeling that I get from going to Tewksbury, Drake, Andover, and even South Lawrence is that people want their tax dollars to be spent wisely.
South Lawrence, not North Lawrence?
South Lawrence, that they want their tax dollars to be spent wisely.
Yeah.
You know, great concern around people losing sight of what's important. You know, they want to be sure that you're in touch with them, that you're talking to them. I do think that there's some unification there. North Lawrence, you know, slightly different. You know, there's great, tremendous need there in terms of economics, jobs, getting a good education. It's different in a way, but I think it's workable. I think that Sue Tucker did a wonderful job of really bridging that divide. She went in and looked at Lawrence and looked at the issue of crime and looked at how it related to car theft and how, you know, there were people there that were staging accident, you know, and she went in and just took a very hands-on problem-solving approach, and that's what I hope to do. Clearly in Lawrence, the runaway, highest priority for them is public safety, and the mayor says, you know, if you don't feel safe in your home, all other things, you know, pale by comparison. If we want Lawrence to have companies go back into Lawrence and, you know, be a stronger economic anchor, I think they have to feel that the safety issues are taken care of, that the person in charge in the mayor, you know, in the mayor's seat is going to go by the books and is going to abide by the law. And I'm proud to say that Dan Rivera, the current mayor, I supported him for mayor a year ago. I helped with his recount. I supported him when he was a city councilor because I felt that he was the right kind of person that needed to be in the mayor's seat.
If it wasn't for Lawrence, Barry might not have been reelected his last time.
Right.
If you recall, he didn't even take Andover, his hometown. What community do you see as your strong community? I mean, do you expect to take Andover, or are you looking upon Lawrence as Barry looked at Lawrence?
I think that Andover will be interesting. I think my guess is that Alex and I will split Andover because we're both from Andover.
Right. And he's a sitting selectman.
He's been a selectman for 11 years. Yeah. I was 8 years a legislator. I'm currently a school committee member in Andover. So my guess is that we will split Andover. You know, Drake, I think I'm going to do very, very well. I'm working really hard there. I've had great traction. I was knocking on doors there all summer. I have the support of Colleen Gary and her folks, Warren Shaw and his folks.
Both of them?
I have both of them. In fact, they're willing to do a picture with me to say that they may disagree on things, but they agree on me. So I've spent a lot.
We'll have to get that picture.
I spent a lot of time in Drake. I think I will do well in Drake. you know, Lawrence is overwhelmingly Democratic. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we're looking at precincts that 80% of them vote Democrat, regardless of who's on the ticket. Tewksbury, for me, will be my challenge.
Right. Barbara, when you're on the campaign trail, are you getting many questions about your tax issue that came up a couple of weeks ago?
Yes, yes.
And
There's
what are you telling voters?
no
What's your
avoiding
explanation
it.
on that?
Sure. So my explanation is that I've always paid my taxes, that this was the result of a dispute on the size of medical deductions taken. The size in question was due to personal family medical issue that arose. I was you know, notified 2 weeks ago by a member of the press that this was the case. We you know, were on a payment plan with them. We are appealing because I really do believe that the Department of Revenue was really inflexible and unfair. And as of the end of today, that will completely be paid off. I would have loved to have said it was this morning, but my husband is literally waiting for the gentleman at DOR to return the call so we can make the direct payment over. So, you know, my family, we've had struggles.
Right. You're referring to your son Rudy? Is that primarily?
Well, my son Rudy has autism.
Right.
It's a lifelong disability.
Right.
There are going to be challenges for him throughout his entire life. You know, I have my mother, who I'm taking care of, who has Alzheimer's. She's lived with me for 20 years. You know, when my husband was starting his small business, my dad had died young. My family moved in with my mom. She was living alone so that we could start our, you know, rent out our condo, start our small business, and then, you know, a few years later, we bought a beautiful home, brought my mom with us, and the compact was that we would take care of her for the rest of her life. And she has Alzheimer's, and she requires tremendous care. You know, that we provide, and we have her go to a day program, and we have people that come in and care for her overnight. And so, you know, we've had health concerns and struggles in my family. I think it makes me stronger. Just as, you know, when I went into, you know, the State House, and people like, oh, aren't you afraid of Tom Finneran? Well, I'm not afraid of Tom Finneran, because as a mom, I had to negotiate my son's future. And that, I think, is a really important thing. So by comparison, you know, I knew how to be an advocate. I wasn't really afraid. And so I think that it makes me a stronger person, the fact that I haven't had an easy life. I haven't had a simple life. I've, you know, really had to come up against obstacles and find a work around them. I just think it makes me a stronger and a real person. I haven't had the luxury of everything being easy in my life, and that's okay. I mean, I just think it gives me an enormous ability to put myself in the shoes of others.
So as of today, that will be resolved? Correct.
I mean, the appeal will still be pending, and I'm hopeful that all that money will be refurbished back, you know, refunded back to me. Right. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to the vote that you believe probably cost you your election. Okay. I mean, and the main thing is, what have you learned from that vote? Because just playing devil's advocate,
sure.
There are a certain segment of population in some of those communities that you mentioned that you're working hard to win their trust and votes, that people don't trust the Democrats anymore. I mean, they raised the tech tax. Everybody railed against it, said it was going to be bad for business, bad for employment, and then they passed it. It had to be repealed. The gas tax, the Democrats, the majority party, voted in a gas tax. Not bad. But they put it to a CPI because they don't want to vote on it every year, right. And probably they didn't raise enough money from the initial tax, so they just lay it off, and now probably the people are going to repeal that. Okay, when you were in the legislature, you know, Deval Patrick was the governor. He vowed to lower property taxes. In the past 6 years, the budget has gone up $10 billion, and yet local aid remains $400 million less, okay, than the pre-recession levels. And then you say to yourself, you know, what happens to the Democratic Party? Aren't there any more fiscal Democrats anymore? Everybody goes down there, and once again, I'm playing devil's advocate. What did you learn from that vote? And yet, you yourself said, you know, as the majority party, it happens in Congress, it happens in Massachusetts, it probably happens everywhere, you know. You don't even vote on a tax bill anymore. You attach it to an omnibus bill, and then you say, oh, well, I had to vote for the budget, you know, if I wanted everything else that we wanted in the, I mean, when are the Democrats, as the dominant party, going to say, well, no, we shouldn't do it this way? I mean, so what makes you any different from what you were back in 2010, okay, to this day? And yet you're saying, you know, well, I know what the common people are going through. And some people say, it's a compelling story, but do you really get it, what the common and average person is going through? Their kids paying high tuition rates, can't get jobs coming out of college, and it seems like every time we turn around, Massachusetts is creating a new tax that eventually has to be repealed. And yet there's $10 billion more in the budget, and we can't afford the things that we should be affording.
Right. So I would just answer.
Is that a question?
In a long-winded way.
Yes, yes.
But how are you
how do you
different?
really feel?
How are you any? No,
Right.
but
No, I get it.
But everybody
I get
comes
it.
in here and says
Right.
the same thing that they're going to do. How can we trust you to really?
Let her answer the question, Bill.
So
I get emotional about this.
I understand. So my answer to that would be that I believe that my job is to do right by the taxpayers and to always be mindful of the way that their money is spent. As I mentioned before, two of the things I focused on have to do with big picture and how to better manage Medicaid dollars and pare that down. That's what I've tried to do in terms of long-term care and in terms of care of the disabled as well, because that's where a good portion of the Medicaid money goes to, is care of the elderly and the disabled. In terms of taxes, I am putting 3 kids through college myself right now. I have a junior in high school. I've got my mom with me. I do understand that it's really hard. You know, my family has had, you know, times when one or the other of us have been unemployed. I understand what a struggle that is. In terms of the alcohol tax, I was in favor of its repeal 2 years ago. In terms of the gas tax, I'm a mom. I make tough decisions every day. I have no problem having to force that vote if and when a gas tax needs to continue. So in other words, I'm in favor of not indexing it to the CPI. I've never been afraid to take a tough vote. I mean, people may not like the way I vote, but I've never been afraid to take a tough vote. I took that tough vote on the sales tax. Many other people were afraid to. I took it. Does that mean that I'm in favor of continual tax increases? No. It means that at that point in time, when we had a $5.2 billion deficit, I thought that was the way that we needed to do that. And I think that it was borne out 2 years later when I worked in the Treasurer's office, when Wall Street actually raised our Standard & Poor value. We were one of very few that were actually raised that year. The state budget began to replenish the rainy day fund and to have over $1 billion. I really do think that that each tax needs to be looked at on its own merit in its given time. And so, again, on the alcohol tax, I wanted it repealed. On the indexing, I feel that should be taken away. And I'm not afraid to take a tough vote. I voted against Tom Finneran. I voted against helping Billy Bulger get his pension. I voted when we did the ethics reforms in '09 that they needed to start, immediately and take effect immediately and not be prospective. I always worked with a bipartisan group of people that were always trying to push the envelope and have things be more reflective of suburbia as opposed to be so city-centric. I actually earned a reputation as being a fairly independent thinking person that wasn't afraid to take a tough vote and wasn't afraid to explain why they took the particular vote. I voted for equal marriage in 2004. I was a freshman legislator. The easiest thing in the world would have been for me to just not touch that issue. But I felt compelled that was the right thing to do. I had 4 children that wanted to feel that when they read their history book that they were going to feel that I was on the right side of history with that. I was seen as most in peril of losing my seat in 2004 for that reason. But I did what I thought was the right thing.
Barbara, why did you leave Grossman's office?
I left Grossman's office to try to win the seat back from Jim Lyons.
Oh, in 2010.
In 2012.
12, okay.
Correct.
Right, okay.
2012. Right. We came within 500 votes.
Yeah.
I actually had a group of folks that we found in North Andover. I think there were over 500 people that voted for Scott Brown, Mitt Romney, and voted for me. And the reason being that I worked with Scott Brown on all my autism stuff. I used to go down and be on his TV show. He had Doug Flutie as one of his constituents, so he always wanted to know what I was working on, and I was happy to share that information with him. And with Mitt Romney, the Choices Act, the piece that I referenced that Sue Tucker and I worked on, that became a platform when Governor Romney decided he was going to run for president, was how to rework on how we're going to spend our mass health long-term dollars. So I actually, 2 years ago, went into 2 precincts in Tewksbury and back into Boxford and into North Andover and Andover. I had the backing of every Republican selectman in Boxford 2 years ago. Why? Because when they had a salt shed issue with contamination of salt running off in 95, corroding people's wells to the point where they were replacing their appliances yearly, I was the one that was able to go in and require that the Department of Transportation sit down and work with these folks and work out a mitigation plan that's finally being done now. So I had their backing because I worked really hard for them. And you know, again, it's about doing the right thing and rather than sort of a party thing. So when I knocked on doors, I did well, but a presidential year may pull out Democratic voters in some communities, but it also pulls out Republican voters in other communities.
So this is an important election for you because the last 2 times that you've been on the ballot, correct me if I'm wrong, you've lost.
Correct.
So right?
I won school committee tucked
state.
in between.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
When you've been talking to people out in these communities, did they say anything about the proposed Morgan Kinder pipeline at all?
I'm glad you brought that up.
And yet the National Grid has just come out and they're going to raise everybody's well across the state 37%. Some areas over 40%.
Right. Yes.
So I mean.
So lots of concern in Andover and in Drake and in a section of Tewksbury. It's not going to affect, as currently constructed, a large group of people. But there's
Drake
a little
is
corner in Tewksbury as well. So I have concerns about the impacts to people's property values, public safety, environmental contaminants. Great concern that this is going to come over and get linked up to get shipped elsewhere. Right, either out of the country or certainly out of our state, and with no reduction in people's own energy prices. So we're essentially being a conduit across Massachusetts from New York and Pennsylvania, potentially for stuff that's going to flow out of New England altogether. That said, I attended the Kinder Morgan presentation in Andover in August. And the selectmen and the town council really didn't understand what they were dealing with. And they were saying that we don't like it, so we're not going to respond to them and we're just going to ignore them and hope they go away. And I had to speak with all of them and say, when I was a legislator, there was a pipeline that went through Haverhill, Boxford, and Methuen. And there was a proposed compression station to be added by Algonquin at the same time. And so what I learned, and they were telling everyone, oh, just call your legislator and they'll make it go away. And I had to tell them all that that is not the case, that while they may have the opportunity to get up and speak at a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission meeting, the reality is that FERC trumps everything. FERC trumps all of our state agencies, our legislators, and so what I was suggesting to Andover, and then they did end up doing this, was you had a deadline of September 15th for their initial filing. They were going through 80% of our conservation and wetlands areas. We just moved a salt shed. It took us 10 years to take it out of the intersection in 93 and 495 because it was contaminating our water with salt. Got it moved up one exit to River Road, and now they want to put a pipeline through that very same watershed area. So what I said to them was, I am a practical, pragmatic person. I don't think that you can wish this away. I think this is coming. If it meets the public good, I forget the exact words that public need and public something else, then they can put it through. So I said, you need to get
by that too.
well, so what I said to them was, you need to get ahead of this. Look at our maps, figure out an alternative, offer them an alternative. Don't say, we don't want you here. Everyone's saying that. If you can come up with a well-constructed alternative route that takes it out of our watershed, takes it out of our environmental impacts, and give that to them, they might be willing to listen, because you're not saying, oh no, we don't want it, no way, no how. You're saying, we don't want it here. Can you move it over here? And so as a result of my, talking to the town manager, town council, the conservation board, and the selectmen, that's what they're doing now. And I think that's a much more realistic approach than saying, we don't like it, so we're not going to let you come on our land.
When you were at that meeting, did anybody question the Kinder Morgan people about just what you said, that this gas is going to go out of the country rather than, and what was the answer?
They just talked in circles. Yeah, they talked in circles.
So you're opposed to the pipeline, it sounds like.
I'm opposed to it because of the impacts, right? What's going to happen. I think that the part that we have, and I'm concerned again that it's not going to bring any relief to families' bills. There are people that think by putting this through, they're going to get a cheaper gas bill,
it might keep it where it is instead of continually going up. I mean, obviously there is a need for natural gas.
Right.
Well,
and there's plenty of natural gas, virtually stone's throw away in Pennsylvania, via New York, that we can't get now.
He made a great point just last week, though, that, and this is something we need to look at, it seemed like just a year ago that they were talking about a huge surplus of natural gas.
There is a huge surplus of it, but it isn't where we can't get at it. That's the whole reason why we need more pipeline capacity.
It sounds like double speak from the utility companies. Did you attend the meeting in Drake the other night? They had a big meeting on it.
Yeah, I was not able to go to that one, but I have someone there's a meeting this morning. I have my.
Oh, where's the meeting this morning?
I think it's in Drake.
Between whom, do you know?
I think it's at the high school. It's the coalition. It's the coalition. It's not Kinder Morgan. Yeah. Yeah, I had an event in Boston the night of the presentation that Colleen set up. Yeah, so I wasn't able to go to that. But
this is going to be a big issue. I mean, it's because of what you said. I mean, everything I keep reading, and the Washington Post has even done some stories. It's almost like this is a done deal. And I'm saying, well, it probably is. Yeah.
Well, that's the problem is they
made it a done deal?
They called the September 15th filing their initial filing, but from the sounds of it, it sounded as though it's the initial filing until some such nebulous time at which it becomes the final filing. So that's why I was saying to Andover, let's get ahead of them prior to them filing on September 15th, talk directly to Alan Fort, who is the point person at Kinder Morgan. Families, individual abutters were not allowed to even give any input until after September 15th. Once it was filed, then they can call and contact FERC and offer their concerns and whatever, but they wouldn't even collect those until such time as the initial plan was in. But it was very, very nebulous as to when it transitions from being an initial plan to a final plan. And there are some environmental impacts that I think that FERC will pay attention to and will acknowledge and will essentially force Kinder Morgan to go back to the table and negotiate with communities. But at the end of the day, if FERC decides that it serves the public purpose, then it gets to go through. And this was my exact experience when they tried to put a compression station on over at the intersection of 125 and 495. And it didn't happen for market reasons. For whatever reason, Quebec decided that it just wasn't going to be worth their while at that time to put this through. But I learned pretty quickly that the best you can do is look to mitigate the impacts, but to pretend that not liking them and they're going to go away magically is just ludicrous.
Barbara, how many years do you have left on your school committee term?
1 more year.
one more year, would you resign from that position?
I would,
Yeah.
I would. I think what would happen, to make the most sense, would be, we have March elections, town elections, so it would probably make sense to, you know, announce the intention to resign, and in March, when they do the town election for the 2 seats that would normally go that 3-year term, that they would have, you know, the opening on the ballot for the 3rd position, and it would be for a year. It would be to finish out the term as opposed to a 3-year term.
Has this been would you say a clean race between you and Mr. Vespoli, or any issues with the way the campaigns have been operating?
It's been a challenge. I mean, I just continue to push forward, and I want this race to be about ideas and experience and our records. You know, and so, I mean, that's what I hope, that people, what comes through is my sincerity, my true want to do this job and do a really good job. My accomplishment, there will be a ceremonial signing on October 23rd of 3 of the 4 pieces of legislation that I got signed into law. They were signed in August, but between the governor's schedules and actually the mayor of Boston's schedule, it's been pushed out to October 23rd, but we'll have the signing at Fenway Park. We expect about 500 people to come, which is what happened when we got the private medical insurance done 4 years ago. And again, in terms of being a realist, I knew when I got the insurance coverage passed that I couldn't get the whole thing done at once. So I did the part that I thought I could do, that was doable and workable, and circled back to it. And I think that with all pieces of legislation and with all reforms and whatever, the devil is in the details, in the implementation. And I think we always need to be open to going back and seeing what the impacts are of what we pass, and whether it follows what we anticipated, and if it doesn't, then we need to be open to making those changes.
Why did you say it when Jim asked you the question? You sighed and you said it's been a challenge.
Well, I
can
mean,
you elaborate on that?
there
a
are
little bit,
folks out there that are just going to town on, you know, there are people that are, I think, motivated to, you know, to see my opponent win. And some of the tactics that they're taking, I think, are pretty unsavory, and they're not based on fact. And
like what, Barbara?
just some of the radio that's been going on, some of the chatter on the radio and stuff like that. Folks that haven't spoken to me directly, haven't asked my point of view on the story, just sort of running with something, running with their version of the truth.
When you say the radio,
Yeah.
which radio station are you referring to?
There was a lot of talk a week or 2 ago on WCAP.
Yeah. Is that with Tom Duggan?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Who never interviewed me, never asked my side of the story, and just sort of ran with.
This was on the tax issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Vespoli had one too, right? Didn't he have it?
No, that isn't accurate, actually.
'Cause I was on vacation with that
yeah.
book, but I thought I saw that Vespoli
Yeah.
had a tax
So
issue too.
that's not accurate.
Oh,
Just
okay.
just as when I was called by the Tribune,
Yeah.
and they said, "Oh, you had something in 2007," and I didn't believe that I did. So I was asking my husband. So his and mine were basically the same issue. They were as a result of refis. Apparently, you have to list on the registry what the amount is owed as of that point, I guess in preparation for it flipping over. And so I believe that the 2 in his case were probably refis, although it didn't mention that they were paid on the registry. Ours said that it was paid. We do our property taxes through our you know, with our mortgage payment. So actually those were not. None of those were accurate. Yeah, I mean, so unfortunately.
Do we
yeah.
have Vespoli coming in?
Yes. Yeah. He gave me 2 dates for next week.
Okay. All right.
Unless anyone else has any questions. The last question.
Sure.
If the state voters repeal the casino law, it will probably be taken up in the legislature. Would you vote to, I guess, repeal the people's vote?
Yeah,
I mean,
on the-
well,
on the gambling?
to keep
Yeah.
the casinos that have been, the licenses have already been given out. That's what some people are talking about, that they would vote to support keeping a casino in Springfield and probably the other casino licenses that have been given out.
So you're asking if I would support the vote? The vote is
Would
going to the...
you support would you respect the people's vote if they vote to repeal the
Absolutely.
casino?
Absolutely.
Or would you, okay.
Yes, I think that, you know, we have 4 questions on the ballot, and I think whatever the will of the voters are is on that. I will support the will of the voters.
Okay.
Do you support
Absolutely.
gambling though? I mean, like the whole concept.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of gambling, I'll be honest
Okay,
with you.
yeah.
I did, however, vote in 2010 to allow allow it to go forward.
Yeah.
At the time, I felt as though there were jobs there that I might not have seen as ideal, but jobs nonetheless that people felt that were needed. What I did then was I really focused on trying to make sure that there'd be the maximum possible opportunity for local communities to deny it if they didn't want it. So I looked at really
So in other words,
strong
to
local
mitigate.
control, mitigation around impacts to public safety, etc., and also really around issues within the atmosphere of the casino. So trying to make sure that they were well lit, that there were clocks so that people know what time, you know, just, it sounds silly, but all those things were things we voted on. And I really tried to make sure that everything I voted on supported, you know, controls around making sure that you know, that people in there were sort of aware of their circumstances, aware of what time it was. It sounds ridiculous, but I just tried to kind of control as much as possible around trying to prevent people from becoming addictive gamblers. That's a big concern of mine. But I did vote, you know, in favor in 2010, but I will respect the vote. The beautiful thing is the people get to vote on this, and I am not, I did hear at least one story out of the legislature where someone was sort of nuancing, well, we don't have to go by what the voters say. I disagree. I think we need to go by what the voters say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, we want to thank you for coming into the Sun today.
Thank
Wish you
you.
well on the campaign trail, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you in action on
Thank you.
October 21st in the debate.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.